Hello, my name is Laurie Hogewald. I'm the head of History and Politics. This is an introduction to history, democracy and dictatorships. History, Democracy and Dictatorships is a course you can study here at Godalming as part of the History and Politics department. It's one of the two history courses you can study, the other one being History, Rebellions and Revolutions. You can also study in History and Politics, Ancient History or Politics. History, Democracy and Dictatorships involves you studying in Unit 1, the Wars of the Roses and Henry VII. Unit 2, you look at Germany from 1919 through to 1963. For Unit 3, you look at Russia and its rulers from 1855 through to 1964. And you've also got a coursework choice too. When you look at Wars of the Roses and Henry VII, you consider a range of things, including why there are rising tensions in England prior to the Wars of the Roses, and why there's a breakdown in law and order, and you've got these two sides developing in the build-up to the Civil War. You consider how the extent to which Henry VI is responsible for this. Henry VI is a notoriously poor king who's very weak, and you consider the extent to which he is responsible for this build-up in tensions. You look at the events of the Wars of the Roses itself and how Edward IV is eventually victorious in 1961, and you look at the changing fortunes of the two sides during the period. You then also consider how Henry VII is able to take the throne from Richard III only a couple of years after Edward's death, why Henry VII manages to make this comeback. You then look at how Henry VII rules England itself and how he brings a certain level of stability to England. Alongside this, you also consider Germany from 1919 through to 1963. You consider why the Weimar Republic fails and how Hitler rises to power, looking at the impact of Hitler and the Nazis themselves, but also considering outside factors such as the failures of the Weimar Republic and the Great Depression as well. You look at the extent to which Nazis actually managed to inflict a change of ideas on Germany in the build-up to World War II, how much their policies had impact and how much they didn't. You consider, from a domestic perspective, the impact of World War II and why Germany carries on fighting to the bitter end. And you also consider how, in the aftermath of World War II, Germany is split in two, into West Germany and East Germany in 1949. And you then look at the period post-World War II and how West Germany is more successful economically than East Germany in the period 1949 through to 1963. Alongside this, you look at Russia and its rulers from 1855 through to 1964. You consider why Russia was so far behind the rest of Europe in 1855. Both in terms of economically and other aspects as well, such as its politics. You consider why it's such a difficult country to rule, in part due to its wide range of nationalities, but also considering the vast size of the country and how that impacts the way it's ruled as a country. You look at both of the revolutions in 1917 and consider why they happened. You also look at the impact of communism on Russia and how much it changes as a country whilst it is the Soviet Union, and also consider the way in which it doesn't change too. You look at the different Soviet rulers and compare them to each other and how they rule the country in different manners, from Lenin through to Stalin and Khrushchev. Alongside this, you have a coursework option where you look at one of these four different topic areas. You can choose to look at the Crusades, the Tudors, the background to the civil rights struggle in the USA, which is 19th century America effectively, or the Cold War. All four of these, you would get to pick one of them, complete free choice, up to you, and you would write a detailed essay on these topic areas with support from your teachers. So it's a nice chance to pick the area which you find most interesting. An example of what you would be studying if you chose to study history, democracy and dictatorships, and you studied the Wars of the Roses, is the famous case of the Princes in the Tower. The Princes in the Tower are Edward IV, two sons who were due were next in line for the throne. And Edward V, the older of the two, should have become king after Edward IV's death. However, there's the famous incident of them disappearing, most likely murdered, although there's never quite been the proof for it, but it's pretty certain murdered on the orders of Richard III. Now, this is a fascinating example, Richard III here. Richard III is a fascinating example. Richard III had been a loyal ally to Edward IV all the way through his reign, sticking with him through thick and thin. So the Prince of the Tower is a fascinating example of why Richard III loses such support and ends up losing the throne to Henry VII, only ruling for a couple of years. His actions of killing the princes were driven by, some would argue, by self-preservation, in that he feared that once they took the throne, he would be replaced, if not killed, by his sister-in-law, effectively, the Woodville family, who had a lot of influence over the young princes, and so he acts for his own ruthlessness. But it alienates the nobles for obvious reason, and is part of the reason why Henry VII, when he lands in England, is able to defeat Richard III in battle. So the Prince's Tower is one really interesting aspect of looking at this period of medieval English history. Alongside that, you would look, when you're looking at Germany, amongst other things, why was the Berlin Wall built? You consider that period post-World War II as the two sides are developing in Berlin, and look at the period up to the building of the Berlin Wall, the number of people who were escaping from East Berlin to West Berlin, and in fact using it as a way of getting out of the Soviet bloc entirely. You consider the differences in living conditions between these two different sides of Berlin, and use it as kind of a case study of how the different routes in which West Germany and East Germany were going, and why East Germany during this period was considerably more successful economically than East Berlin. West Berlin was more successful than East Berlin, and consider why the Berlin Wall was seen as a response to that, and how Berlin was divided between the two. You'd also, as part of this, consider the West German economic miracle, and consider how West Germany gets back on its feet after World War II very rapidly, and why East Germany can't compete with this, and why this inadvertently leads to the Berlin Wall being built. Alongside that, when you're studying Russia, you consider the role of Rasputin and his murder. Rasputin is this religious kind of figure, this religious prophet who wields an enormous amount of influence in the build-up to the 1917 revolutions. The wife of the Tsar is wielding a large amount of influence, and she's already viewed pretty badly because she's German, and Rasputin comes in and wields a huge amount of influence over her because he helps cure their son, and so he ends up managing to influence a lot of policy which he's creating based on little more than whim, it seems, or his own personal devices. And so hatred for the Tsarina rises, and the Tsar Alexander on the front is being undermined at home by this, basically, and his standing is being reduced. Rasputin tries to be removed, or people try to remove Rasputin repeatedly, and he seems to survive a lot of it before his eventual murder, being shot and stabbed and poisoned and thrown into a freezing lake, and seemingly surviving all of it. So Rasputin is a really good example of why the revolutions of 1917, or a really big part of why the revolutions of 1917 happen, as he plays a big role in the unpopularity of the Tsarina in this period. And lots of propaganda, like we see here, painted him as basically controlling the Tsar and Tsarina and influencing their action. If you choose to study history, democracy, and dictatorships, those are some of the things which you could look at while studying here. If you have any questions about any of this, please do email me at lhw@godalming.ac.uk.